Legend Total War here, and today we're doing another tier list using Tier Maker, this time covering the Dwarf unit roster tier list. They've obviously just had the DLC, and so there's quite a few more units that we have to cover now, because we covered this back in Warhammer 2. Now before we get into the tier list itself, I do need to let you guys know that this video here is sponsored by Manscaped. So you guys know I've been with Manscaped for ages now, love the product, love working with them, and I want to talk to you guys today about the Lawnmower 5.0 and the Handyman. I use a lawnmower for pretty much everything from shaving my beard to shaving my head. It's quick and easy to use, and I've never injured myself despite almost always doing a rush job on it. It comes with changeable blades to suit your needs and a nifty bag to keep it organized. The Handyman gives the closest shave I've ever had with an electric razor. Right now you can order a bundle deal and get both with 20% off and free international shipping by clicking my link in the description or pinned comment. Big thanks to Manscaped for sponsoring this video. Okay, with that being said, let's get into the tier list itself. I've set this up into categories. We've got melee infantry first, then missile infantry, war machines and artillery, the grudge settler units, and then the thunder barge, which we need a whole section for that one. Now, it's also important to note what is the criteria that we're going to use to judge these units. It's not simply a case of strong unit go up top, weak unit go down to the bottom. Because this is a campaign-based tier list, we have to take the conditions that are required to recruit these units into consideration. So there are some units that can be recruited in one turn, some units that don't even require a military building, some units that take 2 turns to recruit, some units that have higher upkeep compared to similar units in their roster. And all of this will be taken into consideration. It's not just simply stats equals S or D tier, that kind of stuff. And I'll go over the things that are taken into consideration with that. But you might notice that some units that might seem like they're pretty good on the battlefield will get low rankings just because, in my opinion, they don't perform well on a campaign perspective. Okay, so first up we have the Dwarf Miners. Now this one previously I probably would have put it at B tier because it's a tier 0 unit, which is a unit that doesn't require a military barracks. All you have to do is own a settlement and you've got access to these troops. However, it is no longer the only tier 0 unit. You now have access to Dwarf Warriors, which is a significantly better unit in my opinion, at a pretty similar price point. They're a little bit more expensive, but I think that the price is worth it considering what they can do. I'm going to put this at D tier because I just don't think there's ever really any need to recruit. The only reason I would ever recruit a miner unit is if I only had enough money to recruit a miner and I needed a unit and I literally couldn't afford a Dwarf Warrior. And that's, I think, a rare situation, a real emergency if that's sort of things happening with a Dwarf campaign, considering their economy is pretty solid at the moment. But the only advantage that the Dwarf Miners have over the Dwarf Warriors is that they have a bit of armor piercing, which in the early stages of the campaign, you don't really need armor piercing because most of the units that you go up against will just be like goblins and marauders. So by the time that you actually need to have some armor piercing, you will have opened up a lot of armor piercing units in here. You don't need to rely on these troops whatsoever. So there's really no need to recruit them. And just to put things in a bit of a perspective, I usually consider B tier to be the tier where units are meeting expectations. If it's C tier, it means that they're a little bit below expectations, but I'll still recruit them every now and again. D tier is really, I don't ever recruit them. A tier are units that I will oftentimes recruit pretty early on and keep for the entirety of the campaign. And S tier units are usually units that I put into armies that I would consider to be doom stacks, and these ones are heavy contributors to those doom stacks. Not necessarily units that I will only spam in the army, but units that will contribute to be an unstoppable force. Okay, so now we're moving on to the Dwarf Miners with blasting charges. This is not a tier 0 unit, it requires a barracks. However, I think that the addition of the blasting charges makes it worth it. I'm going to put it at B tier. It is at a higher price point as compared to the regular miners. However, these blasting charges are pretty damn deadly in the early stage of the campaign. Unlike the armor piercing, this is actually very useful against goblins and marauders because these are tightly packed units that the blasting charges oftentimes can just delete a full unit. And so you can get a lot of value over these guys without taking too much damage over successive battles, as long as they're not getting ground down in melee. So you can get a lot of value out of this one here. Then we've got the regular Dwarf Warriors. This is a tier 0 unit. I think it performs at a B tier level as well. Good solid unit, very good in auto-resolve in a race that is, generally speaking, very good in auto-resolve. You can rely on these guys to recruit in an emergency situation well into the late campaign if you absolutely have to. They're not going to perform great in manually resolve for dishing out damage, but these guys are good at just holding the line. They've got a good amount of leadership, good amount of armor. They'll perform exactly as, in my opinion, as expected, and you can boost them a fair bit in the tech tree as well, giving them the shield wall ability, allowing them to deflect missiles, which is very useful. So I think shields are quite valuable, because one of the most dangerous unit types in the game, one of the most common unit types, is missile units, and so a shield is very valuable to deflect that. Then we've got the great weapon variant of the Dwarf Warriors. Now, this is something that is pretty consistent across Total War Warhammer in general, not just for the Dwarves. But typically speaking, I don't value the Great Weapon variants for most lower and mid-tier infantry, largely because in the early stages of the campaign, what do I need the armor piercing for? And why are the Great Weapon variants higher upkeep cost than their non-Great Weapon variant, like the shield variant? In my opinion, a shield is more valuable than a bigger axe, especially in the early stage of the campaign. And so if these guys here had the exact same upkeep cost, I'd put them at the exact same tier. But because they cost more, and this one here also requires a military barracks compared to this one not requiring one at all, I don't really value this one at all. I'm going to put this one at C tier, borderline D tier, because I just don't need armor piercing at the turn 1 of the campaign. Just don't need it. Then moving on to the regular Longbeards, I'm going to put this one at B tier. It's recruited at tier 3, performs at a tier 3 level. Now, you might think, oh, but Longbeards are fantastic. I would put them at A tier. Here's the thing. There's a lot of units that were previously higher tier, that were brought down in tier, that are tier 3 now, that I think are better than Longbeards. So we have to keep that into consideration. But, you know, only takes 1 turn to recruit. Solid infantry that you can use to hold the line. I was going to say line infantry, but that's not what it is. And they're just like a straight up upgrade of the Dwarf Warriors. Obviously, they cost more in upkeep cost, but I think the value is equally reflected in that. So as you progress throughout the campaign, if you like to be replacing your units as you're going, then Longbeards are pretty solid for that. Then we've got the Longbeards with great weapons, which again suffers the same problem. It's higher upkeep cost, you've got armor piercing with them, but at that point they're at tier 3. Some of your other better armor piercing units will become available that just are way better at suiting that role. And so at the higher upkeep cost, I just don't see much value in this in terms of a teamwork. You're much better off having a higher melee defense shielded unit, especially if it's got shield wall, that is much better at protecting your squishier units that are actually able to dish out way more damage. Now here's the big kicker as well. At tier 3, the Hammerer becomes available. Now I think this is definitely like a tier 4 unit, so it's recruited a tier earlier than I think it should be, because Hammerers can absolutely slap now. I'm going to put it at A tier. I'm pretty sure I put this one fairly low tier before in the previous one for Warhammer 2, but here's the thing. A lot's changed for the Hammerers. They now do magical damage, which is very valuable. There's not many units, if any, in there, in the roster, that dish out magic damage. So this is your solution for dealing with high physical resistance units like demons. They can be boosted by a lot of different lords and skills and traits, so you can get reduced upkeep cost on them and extra physical resistance and ward save. There's a lot that you can do to boost Hammerers more so than Longbeards, in my opinion. The only downside and the thing that stopped this one from actually becoming S tier is the fact that it takes 2 turns to recruit. But if you're looking for a melee infantry slapper, then it's kind of, I think it's worth it to spend that extra turn to recruit these guys, because financially wise, you should be fine, and I think that they perform above their price point, especially all the things that boost them. But I think it's also really important that you do give them put them into an army that they are boosted in, otherwise you're not going to get as much value into it. These are sort of Thorgrim Grudgebearer's preferred unit as well, and he really boosts them by an absolute ton. Okay, and then we've got the Ironbreaker. So this has always been my favorite melee infantry unit in the game, period, because of its extreme versatility. It's a tier 4 unit that performs at a tier 4 level, in my opinion, maybe even a tier 5 level, because it's pretty much the most armored infantry unit that you have, You can have ballistics platings with them, so they can actually deflect artillery shots, which was probably their biggest weakness before. They have explosive charges with more ammunition than the dwarf miners with blasting charges, so they're able to dish out more damage against lighter troops than these variants, probably not these guys here, and they just hold the line a ridiculous amount of time. So melee infantry that's charging into Ironbreakers have just about no hope of breaking through them in a reasonable amount of time, giving your missile units plenty of time to rip the enemy apart. They are perfect at the role that they are supposed to be doing, which is why they're entering S tier. And when I'm building a balanced army of like a balanced doomstack where I've got melee infantry, them, missile infantry and artillery, these guys very rarely let me down. It's usually, if they're going to let me down, it's usually because of some bullshit magic like Claw using bloody warp lightning, and there's nothing I can do about that apart from just trying to dodge it. But at least now with the ballistics blading, you don't have to worry too much about the artillery shooting at you. So super bloody good unit. Okay, now moving on to Slayers. Now previously, and for many years, I have talked shit about Slayers, but honestly, Slayers have gotten a lot of improvements. They're faster now, they're more valuable, they're easier to recruit. These guys are high value now, for the most part. I'm going to put regular Slayers at A tier, because they're recruited at tier 3, same tier as these guys. They're your anti-large infantry unit available in the early stage of the campaign. And they're quick, they're good for running enemy units down. They're very squishy, they will end up dying, but you can replace them usually fairly easily. And there's a lot of lords now that can boost them, not just Ungrim's army, but you now have access to the Demon Slayers, which will boost Slayers as well. So a lot of value will be added to the Slayers if you decide to recruit them. Then we've got the Giant Slayers. Now, I like Giant Slayers. I think they're a little bit better of a unit on the battlefield than regular Slayers, but the thing that turns me off the most about them is 2 turns recruitment. So I'm going to put that at B tier. 1 turn recruitment for this, because this unit here is just a slight stat improvement. Like, it's got a bit of armor piercing and slightly better stats. But 2 turns recruitment for a squish unit. This is a unit that I think needs replacing a lot of the time, because they're just going to die in combat. That's what they're there for. They die, they dish out a lot of damage, they die, right? And so I need to replace these units a fair bit. And so when I go into global recruitment, I don't want to see 4 or 3 turns recruitment. I want to see 1 turn recruitment. And Slayers will oftentimes be able to be recruited way faster than Giant Slayers, making a replaceable army, because that's what's probably going to happen with Ungrim, unless you're really being cautious and only taking on pretty fair fights. It's just going to be way more convenient to recruit them. And as I said, this tier list here will be taking into campaign convenience very significantly into consideration. But if you're just looking for stats and you don't give a fuck about how long a unit takes to recruit, then obviously this unit is slightly better. But, you know, having your army sitting around recruiting for 8 turns compared to 4 turns means that you're also paying for the units that you're also recruiting, which means they're not providing any value while they're sitting there doing recruitment. It's much better to get your army up and running quickly, getting out there and smashing the enemy, which is why I value 1 turn recruitment more. Now, the reason why I give these guys leeway is because they're just better than Slayers. Way better than Slayers. These guys have way more damage output than regular Slayers, and these guys here will hold the line 50 times longer than a Slayer unit ever could. So these are units that once you've recruited, a competent player isn't going to lose them. They're just not going to replace them, unless your army gets obliterated and you end up going up against way too much. But these guys here, they will die in regular fights just because they're very squishy. Anyway, we got the Doomseekers here as well. So they're the anti-infantry variant of the Slayers, but they have fewer entities. They've got a good whirly attack that doesn't do friendly fire. That's really good. But they also take 2 turns to recruit, and they recruit at tier 4. So again, B tier for that one, just for that factor. If these guys here only took 1 turn to recruit, I would put them at A tier, because I do like these units, but 2 turns to recruitment is just, that meets expectation at B tier. But yeah, I really do wish that they would be at 1 turn. These 2 here make sense at being at 2 turns, but these ones here, I just don't think it makes sense. They need to be recruited a bit quicker, in my opinion. Okay, now moving on to missile infantry, we have the Quarrelers. I'm going to put Quarrelers at A tier because Quarrelers are really good. Good solid infantry unit that will be very easy to use because it doesn't have as much line of sight issues as some of the other more damaging units. Recruited at tier 2 from a regular barracks. Thoric Ironbrow can boost them like crazy. It's just a solid missile infantry unit that you can use against lightly armored units very reliably throughout the course of the campaign. But it will falter against smaller troops because it's not that accurate. Like smaller single entities, I mean, like say Goblin heroes. And also against heavily armored units. Like if a Black Orc unit is charging at you, you're going to wish you had something with a bit more armor piercing, which you definitely will be able to get before you go up against Black Orcs, but something to consider. So good unit though. Also as a shield, so you can defeat other similar tiered missile units that don't have shields that are shooting back at you. Then we've got the Great Weapon variant for the Quarrelers. Same problem here. You're paying a higher price, you're losing your shield, and you're getting more melee capabilities. But I don't value melee capabilities on a missile unit. They don't need it. And so I don't want to pay extra for something that I'm only going to use in the most dire of emergencies that probably isn't going to save me anyway, because the stat difference is just not high enough for it to really make a big difference. So I'm actually going to put this one here at C tier, because while it is, like in terms of missile damage, the same, the upkeep cost just doesn't make sense for what it can do. The upkeep cost difference. So I just rarely go for this, especially considering they're recruited at the exact same tier. I just wouldn't recruit them over the regular variant. Because if you recruit these guys, think about this. Paying, like if you're going to put 5 of these guys in an army compared to 5 of these, well, this one here might give you slightly higher stats. You're going to be paying maybe 50 gold a turn extra. And if your army is going to be in existence for 100 turns even, that's a lot of money that you're going to be paying over a long period of time, especially for a unit that's going to perform exactly the same. So it's just not worth it, in my opinion. But that is very nitpicky. If you just like having your archers being able to also dish out armor piercing melee damage, then, go for it. But I don't value that personally. Okay, then we've got the rangers. So we've got the regular rangers here, which I think they're pretty much just as good as a Quarreler unit. They've got shields, they're able to stalk, they're recruited from a different, maybe a little bit less convenient building, but I think that this is still a good solid unit, especially when you combine it with a Thane that gives them snipe. That's very useful as well. Then we've got the Great Weapon variant, which has shorter range, and I just don't value it as much. Yes, this one here does have armor piercing, but shorter range means that you got to get in close, which can sometimes be a little bit finicky. I'm going to put this one at B tier because it is quite useful, just not as useful as longer range ones, in my opinion. And if you need armor piercing, there is a much better unit, which we're going to talk about very soon. So I'm going to put that one at B tier there. Damage dealing, yes, a little bit finicky, just because it has to get in fairly close to use their shots. Then we've got Bugman Rangers. These guys here are S tier because they are able to stalk. They've got iron-warded tankards essentially, so they regenerate. They're Belegar Iron Hammers, like preferred Doomstack, in my opinion. These, if you're looking for like reliable crossbow type troops, these guys here are really the way to go, because having these guys here with snipe and being able to regenerate from minor wounds is just so much more valuable than these guys here. So you can do an absolute ton with Bugman Rangers. You can even use these guys in melee once they've run out of ammunition with hit and runs, because stalk and snipe is just such a useful skill, which again, these guys here can do, but they're not able to regenerate. Regeneration is very valuable, even on a multi-entity unit like that. Okay, then we've got Thunderers. Now previously, I probably would have put Thunderers at A tier, but the tech tree, they're going into S tier because of this, because they're able to boost their range twice in the early stage in the campaign. So you're able to get gun units that have like 170 range very early on. So you've got armor piercing damage output from a tier 2 unit, which by the way, this one here is a tier 3 unit. And you're just able to really outrange any other gun troop in the early stages of the campaign. And this is the unit that you should be using for your armor piercing, because it's just so bloody good. You don't need the armor piercing melee weapons when you can just shoot them from a pretty long distance with these guys here. And there's definitely some other armor piercing options in here as well. And I think that shooting with armor piercing is much better than going into melee with armor piercing, but that's just from a personal preference. So yeah, that one's going into S tier. Thunderers right now are just absolutely top notch. The only thing you have to watch out for is line of sight, but that's the case with every sort of missile unit in this game. But gun units in particular, you don't want to put them behind a hill. You want to be at the top looking down, preferably not at the back of a head of another unit. Okay, then we've got Thunderers with Grudge Rakers. So these are the shotgun variants. This is one of the new DLC units. And something weird is going on with this one. So this isn't going to happen all the time, but something is happening. I have noticed it, in that the Grudge Raker shots tend to do a lot of knockdown. And when a unit is on the ground, it can't take any more damage. I mean, it's not advancing towards you, so you could look at that as an advantage in that it's slowing enemy units down. But this is a unit that's supposed to be dishing out tons of damage. It's short than regular Thunderers. And if they're actually not dishing out as much damage because they're doing more knockdown, then I don't think it's actually more valuable. So I'm actually going to put the Grudge Raker, for the time being, at C tier, just because I think this unit needs some tweaking from Creative Assembly. I really think that this unit should not be knocking any units down. They should just dish out the damage and not worry about knockdown, because I think it's detrimental to the unit. Okay, now moving on to Slayer Pirates. These guys here I think are pretty solid. I'm going to put them at A tier. I think some people will probably disagree with me on this, but I think it's due to its versatility. It's recruited at the same tier as regular Slayers. They've got the same melee attack, melee defense. They miss out on the anti-large, and they don't have as much melee damage. But the 6 base shots that it has with its pistols, typically speaking, in my opinion, will mean that it dishes out more damage across a wider variety of enemies, while also not getting totally friggin' destroyed getting in melee. So you can use these guys, get a few kills, and you don't have to get them killed in the combat, which I know that means that they're not fulfilling their Slayer Oath, but in terms of progressing in your campaign, it's actually better if your units don't die. And so having that versatility there I think is important, but it definitely doesn't deserve to be an S tier. Okay, then we've got Iron Drakes. Iron Drakes are better now than they used to be, in my opinion. They may not dish out as much damage, but the longer range, I think, provides more value. It means that you can be a little bit more careful with them. You don't have to be really upfront and personal to get in loads of damage, especially with the Trollhammer torpedoes. Because this one here, I think it's still at 80 range, which is I think what it was before. But I know these ones here massively improved their range. All right, now Iron Drakes, pretty good units. I'm going to put them at A tier. And the Trollhammer torpedoes, I'm also going to put it at A tier. Now, this one I probably would have put at B tier before, because it had really kind of short range, and now its range is higher than pretty much anything else. And so this is a really good anti-large weapon to use against if you're going up against like monsters or anything. A little bit inaccurate, but that's okay. Some of those shots are likely to hit, and when they do hit, they hit really hard. So I think this is a really good unit. So I'm going to put them both in A tier there. I've got some more to say about Iron Drakes a little bit later down the track when we talk about this unit, which is why these ones didn't quite enter S tier. So we'll see what happens when we get to there. Right, now, the Gyrocopters. Previously, I haven't been that fond of Gyrocopters, but now, with the changes to their unit models and everything, especially these Gyrocopters here, the tier 2 variant, it goes to S tier because it's so bloody good. So if you've been watching my recent Malachi campaign, man, I did so much with the Gyrocopter armies, able to get so many heroic victories because these guys here, as long as you don't get ambushed, they've got tons of ammunition even if you don't have engineers in your army. They've got more entities now, so they're pretty much good against everything. So they're good against any type of unit. There's not that many units in the game that can actually take them out of the sky. It's mostly things like Harpies and Furies that you need to worry about. They're very quick. Malachi's obviously got a bunch of abilities that will help them, especially like armor, like what's it called, healing when they get below 50%. But across the other factions, they're still just fine. They're still, in my opinion, an S tier unit. And the fact that you can boost them so much with the engineers, this is a very high value, especially because you can get engineers so much quicker now than you used to be able to do, like in Warhammer 2. Engineers used to increase their capacity at like tier 5. It used to take forever to get more engineers. But now you can increase the capacity at tier 3 So getting a bunch of engineers to boost these guys is super useful, especially because you can make them stalk, so you can hide them out of the way, and just run, you know, basically bombing run straight through Vietnam. And these guys here, they do a really good job. Tons of ammunition, lots of damage output, only a few units that they really have to worry about. Very solid troop. Then we've got the Brimstone gun here. Now the Brimstone gun, I think they actually got a bit of a downgrade compared to what they were before the patch, because these guys used to be anti-large, and now they're just not anti-anything. And while they have flamethrowers, the damage output, it's okay, but they've got kind of low amounts of ammunition. So I find that over the course of a long battle, especially if you're outnumbered, I will get a lot more value out of just a regular gyrocopter than the Brimstone gun. But the Brimstone gun is higher tier, and it costs more on upkeep. So I just don't think it deserves the same spot. I actually don't think they're as good. That being said, if you love to have flamethrowers in your army, then there's nothing wrong with getting them. But in my personal opinion, you get more value out of them. Then there's the Gyro Bombers. Gyro Bombers are good. They now have 4 entities compared to these ones here having 2. They used to be single entities. I just don't think that their damage output is as good, especially considering, again, higher tier. I'm going to put it at B tier. It performs exactly, as far as I'm concerned, at expectations due to the price point. I just think that you're just going to get so much more value out of the regular ones here, because cheaper units means that you can get more of them, you know, which is quite valuable on the campaign side of things, because you usually have a lot of enemies. But yeah, Gyro Bombers, they're fine. I like getting them, but I prefer just the tier 1 variant. I just think you get more value out of them. Okay, now for the artillery. We've got the Bolt Thrower, the most forgettable unit in the Dwarf roster. There is really no reason to ever recruit this. It's a D tier unit. It's recruited at tier 2, at the same tier as a Grudge Thrower. Its main purpose is to take out single entity monsters at a time where there will not be any single entity monsters, because tier 2, just nobody recruits like those kind of units at that stage. And by the time that factions are recruiting them, let's just say greenskins are recruiting the single entity monsters like Arachnarok spiders, you just use cannons. So much better at it. Longer range, more damage output, armor piercing, and they're better against other units, and you know, there's other things that you can do to boost them as well. There is really no reason to recruit this, and it feels more like a multiplayer unit, like a cheap artillery piece that you can use to pad out your army, which probably multiplayer people, you can just talk about that. I don't play multiplayer, so I have no idea, but that's what it feels like. It just doesn't really have any place on the campaign map. If you want to put artillery in your army, which you definitely should, the Dwarven artillery is really good. Grudge Throwers, because most of what you're going to go up against in the early stages of the campaign is going to be infantry, and these guys here, they belong in A tier because they're just so freaking good. Considering a tier 2 unit, there's a lot that you can do to boost them as well, especially with runes. So really solid artillery piece of shit artillery piece. Just don't need it. Shorter range, not going to dish out as much damage. While it might be cheaper, it's not providing value compared to these guys here. These ones here will get you hundreds of kills. These ones here, dozens. It's just get more of these, basically. Alright, then we've got the cannons. I think that the Dwarven Great Cannons are borderline S tier. You know what, I will put them at S tier. Because of all the updates that they've gotten, the fact that they can get up to 600 range, which I think it might just be a Malachi McKayson only situation. These ones here, you just get so much value out of them now, because there's just so many boosts that you can have to the Dwarven Cannons. They're your they're single entity anti-large solution for super long range for a tier 3 unit. Really quite solid. Then we've got the Goblin Hewers, which is a bit of a weird unit because it's an artillery piece, but it's also a melee infantry unit, because the stats on these guys here in terms of their combat stats is equivalent to these guys. They're lower entity numbers, so they're not going to perform, like, you can't just take these guys off their artillery and immediately send them into melee and expect them to do as much damage as these guys. They won't. Small entity numbers. However, the missile attack on these guys here is so ridiculously high that they can delete single entities super quickly at very short range, and then they can go into melee if they want to. You can increase their speed by tons, and you can increase their damage output as well. So I'm going to put these ones here at A tier as well, because yeah, you can actually do a hell of a lot with them. They're just a very strange unit, that's all. Then Organ Guns. Organ Guns have always been my favorite artillery piece in the Dwarven roster, and they still are. I think Organ Guns are amazing. They're good against everything. You know, they're shorter range than cannons, but they're better at at it than pretty much every other artillery piece. They kill infantry units with ease, single entities with ease, big monsters with ease. There's just no unit that it struggles with. The only problem with it is price point, time to recruit, and line of sight, which is the same problem that these guys here will have. But for the stage of the campaign that you get in these guys, they will massively perform at that level. So that's well above expectations. Easily get 400 or 500 kills for them, especially if you've got an engineer to provide them with extra ammunition. And then we've got the flame cannon. Flame cannon has always been a unit that a lot of people swear by, but I'm like, I prefer organ guns and cannons and grudge throwers over them. But I definitely see the value in a flame cannon for sure. I think they actually kind of used to be better when they were arcing their shots a lot more. Now they're like flame throwers. So I think they dish out more damage now, but they're not as good at sieges because it used to be able to just lob the shots over the walls a bit, kind of like the dwarven variant for the mortars. But they can't really do so. Not that you really need to, because you just create a breach and you can shoot through that fairly easily. But I'm going to put that one at A tier there. Again, all the artillery are basically boosted by the same methods and serve similar roles, like anti-infantry, anti-infantry, anti-everything, anti-everything, anti-large. Piss off, basically. So, don't need to spend too much time talking about each individual variant of the artillery. You know, dwarves have plenty to cover all their situations. Alright, now we're talking about grudge settlers. Okay, starting with the Quarreler with Great Weapon Grudge Settler unit. Now, what does this one provide that's different to its variant here? So, in order for this one to be considered good, it has to be above its tier. So if this was a better variant of the that one, it would enter B tier. If it's significantly better, A tier. So what does this one do? I've actually got the game open, and what we can have a look at here is the various different variants of them, and see what are they doing differently to their other counterpart. So these ones here, they provide anti-infantry and shield breaker, an anti-infantry bonus of 8. So that means in the early stage of the campaign, they're going to dish out, well actually in every stage of the campaign, they're going to dish out more damage to infantry than they will to large units. So this is much more useful in the earlier stages when you're almost exclusively going up against infantry, but also in melee, they've got that anti-infantry bonus. So once these guys here have used up their ammunition, they're okay to be sent into melee, much more so than the other variants. Now I think that just the missile infantry and, sorry, the missile bonus versus infantry and the shield breaker alone is allowing this one to enter A tier. So that's really what this kind of unit really needed to be on par with this one. Just something to provide it an edge over it, which this one here does. But of course, spamming these units is going to be a lot more difficult because you just won't have the number of them in the early stage of the campaign. Then we've got the Slayer. So what does this Slayer do? So for example, if this Slayer was exactly the same, it will enter A tier. It's none of these guys are going to actually be worse than their variants because they pretty much will always have lower upkeep cost unless, of course, you are unable. Like if you enter this area here, like upkeep plus 50% for grudge set. But if you're only able to reach here, that just means you are really not being aggressive enough in your campaign. In this is my Malachi campaign that I played on live stream. We managed to do, what was it, 5 full Age of Reckonings and always reach Nollengrom. And the later on the campaign I got, the easier it was to get to Nollengrom. So even with loads of grudges needed, it was actually quite easy. So you should, at the very least, depending on how passive you are, get at least to 50%. That shouldn't be a problem for you. So your grudge settler costs shouldn't be bloated out of consideration. Anyway, so looking at the Slayers here, what are they providing differently compared to others? The other Slayer variants. So they've got Sundered Armor, reducing the enemy armor by 30. So that means that their lack of armor piercing is more valuable. Now, another thing to point out here is that in this particular campaign, we've got Brutal Business going. So that means base weapon damage plus 20. So this is actually supposed to be 53. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, this means that their lack of armor piercing, which do have some, is less apparent than the regular Slayers. Also, they've got Extremely Daring Death Blow, giving them more melee attack, more physical resistance, and armor piercing compared to regular Death Blow. But this is only activated once they're at less than 25% health. So you're not going to get a lot of use out of that before they end up dead. So I don't think that this qualifies them as S tier for that reason alone, but I think that they're also an A tier unit. You know, having a few of these into Ungrim's army, I think makes a lot of sense. But if they just had a little bit more, I would have put them in S tier. I just don't think they quite made it for, to that level, because I really reserve this for some of the absolute best units. And some of these units here will enter S tier, and it'll be pretty obvious why they're going to enter S tier. So the next, well, here's one right here. So the Grudge Thrower, this one's going into S tier. So a cut above this one, and I'll explain why going into this one here. So it's got shrapnel projectiles, and what that means is like the shots mid-air will explode and probably not dish out as much damage, but on a single unit, but spread out that damage a bit more. And what this one does when it hits them has monstrous impact. It reduces their speed by 60%. Now, typically speaking, if you're using artillery in your army, you don't want the enemy closing the distance towards you. So reducing their speed by 60% in a wide area means that you're basically net of ammo, or not really, but you're slowing down their approach, allowing you to get more volleys off on your artillery. That is hugely friggin' valuable for any artillery-based army. So that is why that instantly goes into S tier, just for that reason alone. Okay, then we've got the Grudge Settler Longbeards with great weapons. Looking at that variant, what is it providing? It has Guardian. So physical resistance plus 15% if the unit is a Lord or a Hero. Now, I don't personally consider this particularly valuable because actually a lot of Lords and Heroes already have this, especially Thanes. So I just don't, and I usually don't keep my Lords and Heroes close to my infantry. I just don't think there's a lot of value in it. I usually put them ahead of the infantry to hold the enemy line a bit. So I just don't think that this is valuable at all. So I'm just going to put it at the same tier. It's not like it's a downgrade, especially considering this unit will probably be cheaper than upkeep, depending on how you're going with your Nollengrom, with your Age of Reckoning. Probably be cheaper in upkeep than these guys here. But in terms of overall stats, I just don't think Guardian is any reason to put them above their other variant, the standard one. Okay, then we've got the Hammerer here. So having a look at that one. This one provides it with Frenzy. Now, for a unit that is primarily supposed to get into melee attack, it also has Frostbite, which that just means that units aren't going to be able to get away from it once they're in combat with it, which I guess is pretty good, but typically speaking, the AI doesn't really try to get away that much, unless it's a cavalry unit. But anyway, what it's providing is extra weapon strength plus 10%, charge bonus 10%, and melee attack plus 10, and immune to psychology, which that's great and everything. So this will apply whilst their leadership is above 40, or as they get more experience, whatever their 50% of their whatever number you see here. So you're going to get that for the majority of the battle. And considering it's the melee infantry unit, this is pretty damn valuable to it. But I still don't feel that that is S tier worthy. But I'm gonna put that definitely. It is definitely better for sure. But I just don't think it quite qualifies as S tier right there. Okay, then we've got the Iron Drake Grudge Settler unit. So what's this one doing differently? For one thing, it's got more range than its standard variant by 50%, so it's got 120 range compared to 80, 40 extra range, but it's also got flammable. So this one here will dish out 20% more damage than the regular Iron Drakes, and will allow for other units that have flaming attacks to also dish out 20% more damage. And for that reason alone, because that is a really good combination, that this variant goes into S tier. Because that is just really good, especially if you're putting that into Grombrindal's army, because he boosts these units by a ton. Okay, then we've got the Trollhammer Torpedoes variant of the Gyrocopter. Now, if you watched my campaign, you'll know that I fell in love with these units. These delete monsters. So good. And they've got enough ammunition that, honestly, they're pretty good against infantry as well. This is an S tier unit. You're not going to be able to spam them in your army, but if you're going to roll with Gyrocopters, you've got to put some of these ones in there. They are so bloody good, especially for dealing with flying single entity monsters. These are just absolutely amazing. Great at taking out Terrorguard, especially slow, big flying units. But they absolutely delete single entity monsters. Absolutely fantastic unit. Highly recommended. Get them if you're playing any of the Dwarfen campaigns. Just an absolutely fantastic unit. Actually, probably one of my favorite units in this DLC, apart from a certain other one. Okay, then there's the the Grudge Settler version of the flamethrower. So having a look at what that one's doing, it also has shrapnel projectiles, and it causes the burnt effect. So this one here will probably dish out more damage in a wider range of effect, without really the ability to sort of annihilate a specific unit. I think that this one here, the Grudge Thrower, having monstrous impact with its shrapnel projectiles, but the Flame Cannon not having that, is a little bit disappointing for it. So I don't consider that to be much of an upgrade. So it's just going to go back into the same tier as it. It doesn't get to enter S tier. If it had the monstrous impact, then I definitely would be putting that into S tier. Okay, then we've got the final unit here, the Thunder Barge. This unit blew me away. I can't believe just how strong this bloody unit is and how much you can boost it. Really, the only way to take it out is by shooting it, and you can give it so much missile resistance, even if you're not playing as Malachi's faction, which of course he gets it up to 70%. There's runes you can give them as well. They can get their missile resistance up even further. And they obliterate units so quickly. And they essentially have unlimited ammunition. Like, I've never even come close to running out of ammo with these guys. And the Grudge Raker shots of the small arms fire that are in there, they actually have unlimited ammunition. So these guys here routinely get hundreds of kills in every single battle. They're good against every single unit type, single entities, large units, blobs of infantry, especially blobs of infantry. They're absolutely fantastic. They are arguably the only tier 6 unit in the game. And so I've done something particularly special for this tier list just for this unit, and that is to add an extra layer on top of S tier just for the Thunder Barge. So these units here are super fucking strong. I don't think there is a single unit in the game that is quite as overpowered as the Thunder Barge is. Its vulnerabilities are so few that even if you do encounter its vulnerabilities, which is basically like a bunch of bloodthirsters, it's so rare to even encounter that because there's not that many Coronate factions, and even if you do encounter them, they usually don't have any bloodthirsters in them anyway. If you've got a couple of these guys, you can usually just shoot them out of the sky before they get close anyway. And then if they've got no missile units, there's nothing that anyone can do about them. If bats come into range with them, they just get blown out of the sky straight away. So anything that they are vulnerable with, they've just got so much firepower that they kill it before they get close anyway. So super bloody overpowered. They're very expensive units though. They take 3 turns to recruit, and they are very expensive, but they are so worth it because they just delete everything, which is why they got the above S tier ranking. The first time in any tier list I've ever done that for any unit is adding an extra layer just for this unit. And I don't plan on doing that ever again, unless another ridiculously powerful, overpowered unit shows up for another race. But in terms of this latest DLC, that's the only one that's going to get that ranking there. Anyway, that's my tier list there. As you can see, the Dwarf roster is pretty solid. Anything that is in B tier or above, as far as I'm concerned, is performing at or above expectations. So there are only 7 units of the 39 that are here that I think are below expectations. And really, these ones here, they're just like filler units. And these ones here, they've all got other variants. There's no like any standalone units that are the only type in its roster that belong in here. So that means in every single category, the Dwarfs have a unit that performs above expectation. You want a war machine? You've got some here that are above expectations. You got melee infantry above expectations. You got missile infantry above expectations. You got grudge settlers above expectations. So the Dwarves have everything in their roster now that I think that they need to absolutely dominate on the battlefield. So they're in a really good solid state now, I think. Anyway, that's the end of this one here, guys. Let me know in the comments what you think of the Dwarf roster, whether you agree or disagree with any of these here. Don't forget to check out Manscaped. The link will be in the description and pinned comment. Once again, big thanks to them. These videos here wouldn't be possible without them. And I appreciate you guys as well. Who these videos, it wouldn't be possible without you guys as well. So appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.